In today's rapidly evolving world, a striking phenomenon has emerged and is emerging as we speak, one that could be described as the religion of pleasure. This term, while not religious in the traditional sense, captures a prevailing mindset where the pursuit of personal pleasure and gratification assumes paramount importance in individuals' lives, akin to the fervor and devotion typically associated with religious beliefs. Modern society, with its technological advancements and cultural shifts, often encourages an unrelenting quest for pleasure. From the instant gratification offered by social media to the allure of consumerism and entertainment, there's a constant bombardment of stimuli designed to satiate our desire for enjoyment and excitement and pleasure. In this context, the pursuit of pleasure often transcends mere enjoyment and becomes a guiding principle for many, similar to a creed or a doctrine. The Bible, in its prophetic wisdom, foretold this scenario. The Bible warned us about the very religion of pleasure. It warns of a time when people will become lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God, in 2 Timothy 3:4. This scriptural insight is profoundly relevant today, as it highlights a stark shift in priorities, from a spiritual, God-centered existence to a self-centered, pleasure-seeking lifestyle. It's a clear indication of how the quest for pleasure can overshadow the quest for spiritual fulfillment and alignment with divine principles. This religion of pleasure-seeking is not just a matter of choosing entertainment or leisure activities. It often manifests in more serious aspects of life. For instance, when individuals prioritize immediate gratification over their health, indulging in harmful habits or neglecting physical and mental well-being for fleeting moments of joy, it's a clear sign of this philosophy in action. Similarly, when personal pleasure takes precedence over relationships, including one's relationship with God, it demonstrates how deeply ingrained this religion has become. In this pursuit, the intrinsic values of moderation, self-control, and spiritual depth often get sidelined. The relentless chase after ephemeral pleasures can lead to a hollow existence, devoid of true contentment and spiritual enrichment. It breeds a culture where instant gratification is sought after rather than enduring fulfillment and deeper, more meaningful connections with others and with the divine. By calling this phenomenon a religion, we acknowledge its pervasive and influential role in shaping behaviors, attitudes, and life choices. It is a potent reminder that what we prioritize and worship profoundly impacts the course of our lives and our spiritual journey. This religion of pleasure poses a significant challenge to individuals seeking a balanced, meaningful life, one that harmonizes earthly joys with spiritual aspirations and responsibilities. It calls for introspection and a conscious effort to align one's pursuits with enduring values and higher purposes, transcending the fleeting allure of momentary pleasures. The religion of pleasure. The religion of pleasure is not a new religion. It is something that fallen mankind has enjoyed. People worship at the altar of pleasure. We live in an age of pleasure seekers rather than God seekers. We live in an age of eat and be merry, for tomorrow we die. The religion of pleasure is the religion of the flesh. We all must be careful of this because our flesh loves pleasure, and there is a pleasure that sin brings. You and I are not immune to this religion, the religion of pleasure. The human body craves after it. I am tired of Christians who attempt to pretend that there is no pleasure associated with sin. There is a pleasure in sin that the fleshly man longs for. Don't let anyone lie to you into believing that there is no pleasure in sin. There is pleasure in fornication. There is pleasure in adultery. There is pleasure in sexual immorality. There is pleasure in sowing discord. There is a pleasure in getting revenge. There is a real pleasure in drugs. There is a real pleasure in alcohol. There is a pleasure in the sins of this world. But allow me to read you one verse from the Bible. 1 Timothy 5:6. But she that liveth in pleasure is dead while she liveth. But she that liveth in pleasure is dead while she liveth. But she that liveth in pleasure is dead while she liveth. An ungodly person who is living their life for pleasure is alive, but they are as good as dead since they are not living for God. The pleasure of sin deceives because it never lasts and always attempts to make you want more and more. The religion of pleasure speaks of a strong affinity to satisfy the desires of the flesh. When you place the desires of your physical body above the demands of the Spirit of God, you have taken up the religion of pleasure. Meanwhile, the Bible establishes the fact that the demands of the Spirit are contrary to the appetites of the flesh. If we choose to obey and be in subjection to the Spirit of God, then we must put our bodies under subjection. But we cannot fulfill the desires of the flesh and please God at the same time. When we give higher consideration to our flesh and its unrestrained desires, we are practicing the religion of pleasure, because the only language that our flesh understands and flows best with is nothing but pleasure. However, 1 Timothy 5:6 says that she who lives in pleasure is dead while she is alive. The word pleasure, according to that passage, is interpreted as excessive luxury, voluptuousness, or wantonness. Before Paul mentioned this to Timothy, he was addressing how true widows ought to live a life of total consecration to God. Thereafter, he stated that any woman who gives herself to sexual perversion is dead while she is alive. This, however, does not in any way exonerate men. Any man also who is given to lust and the religion of pleasure is dead while he is alive. The religion of pleasure is selfish. It pushes you to put your sinful desires above the well-being and the future of your loved ones. Fall in love with your family. Put them before pleasure. Fall in love with your children. Put them before pleasure. Think about how your sin can destroy your family. Think about how your sin can cause a division in your family. Pleasure can pull you away from your responsibilities. It can pull you away from your duties as a husband or a wife. Fall in love with your husband or wife. Fall in love with your children. They are worth more than the pleasure of sin. The pleasure of sin is deceptive. It will deceive you into thinking you can live a double life. You can't. You really can't. What secret pleasure do you have? What secret pleasure do you have that your husband or wife or family know nothing about? It will destroy you. Sin is deceptive. Sin is destructive. Numbers 32:23. Be sure your sin will find you out. Be absolutely certain that your sin will find you out. Be sure your sin will find you out. The religion of pleasure makes you make dumb decisions, stupid decisions. One of the biblical characters that practiced the religion of pleasure was King Solomon. In Ecclesiastes 1:16-17 he said, I communed with mine own heart, saying, Lo, I am come to great estate, and have gotten more wisdom than all they that have been before me in Jerusalem. Yea, my heart had great experience of wisdom and knowledge, and I gave my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceived that this also is vexation of spirit. According to Kings 11:3, Solomon had 700 wives, who were princesses, and 300 concubines, and they turned his heart from the Lord. God gave Solomon wisdom more than any other king before him, but the religion of pleasure made him a fool. Solomon was wiser than you or I, but yet the religion of pleasure led him to make dumb decisions. Better men and better women than you or I have fallen to the religion of pleasure. You are not immune to this religion. Your flesh each day wants to worship at the altar of pleasure. This is why we are told to put off the old man and put on the new man. This is why we are told to put to death the flesh, because the flesh worships at the religion of pleasure. Solomon gave all that his heart, eyes, flesh, and appetite desired to himself, and at the end all it amounted to was vanity. It was sad that Solomon died worshiping an idol. If the religion of pleasure led Solomon astray, we shouldn't think it will lead us anywhere better than it led him. Hebrews 11:24-26 says, By faith Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he had respect unto the recompense of the reward. Here the Bible points to the fact that, first, there is pleasure in sin, and second, that the pleasure of sin is momentary. It is only for a season. It does not last for long. One thing we cannot argue is that there is pleasure in sin. We know from our individual experiences that there is pleasure in sin, although the pleasure may be momentary. The danger of the religion of pleasure is that such pleasure is suddenly cut off. When it is over, the individual is left in bitterness, humiliation, regrets, and nothing but destruction. The pleasures the people of the world are running after in our day was the same that Moses ran away from in his time. He esteemed the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt. The reason many people choose pleasure in our day is because they don't understand the eternal consequence. If they do, they will rather suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasure of sin. Sin will always catch up with its victims. The wages of sin is nothing else but death. Sin is like a sweet poison. You can enjoy yourself while committing it. Numbers 32:23. And be sure your sin will find you out. Sin will find you out after you have enjoyed its pleasure for a season. The pleasure of sin is for a little moment, but the consequence of sin is eternal. The pleasure of sin is secretly enjoyed, but the wages of sin are publicly awarded. A day of reckoning always comes when sin will catch up with those committing it. No one would commit sin if it does not bring pleasure. The pleasure in sin is the bait by which sinners are trapped. Sin feels good. Sin is fun. Sin promises excitement and allures us with the prospect of enjoyment. Sin deceives us with fleeting pleasure, and to worsen the matter, our adversary, the devil, also tries to hide the consequences of sin from us. Sin fools us into believing there will be no real damaging consequences for our actions. We may suffer a little discomfort here or there and sometimes have a guilty conscience for a while, but the payoff for the pleasure of sin far outweighs whatever consequences we might have to endure. Galatians 6:7-8 says, "Be not deceived, God is not mocked, for whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. For he that soweth to his flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption, but he that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting." The religion of pleasure leads nowhere but to hell. No one given to pleasure can please God. People who walked with God were men and women who mastered the discipline of bringing their bodies into subjection. Paul, speaking in 1 Corinthians 9:27, says, "But I keep under my body and bring it into subjection, lest that by any means, when I have preached to others, I myself should be a castaway." We must learn to walk in the Spirit so that we will not fulfill the desires of the flesh.